The thumping bass of earth jazz music could be heard even through the reinforced walls of Garliv 7's commercial corridor. Mirren wiped sweat from his brow as he maneuvered through the crowded marketplace, dodging the flailing tentacles of a Quasirian merchant arguing over the price of synthetic spices. At 15, he was small for his age, but what he lacked in stature, he made up for with nimble feet and sharp eyes, essential traits for surviving as an orphan on a neutral space station where rules were suggestions at best. "Hey, Squirt, watch the merchandise," barked a three-armed vendor as Mirren slid between stalls. "Sorry, Gex," Mirren called back, not slowing down. He was late for his shift at Lumina's cafe, and she wasn't known for her patience, especially when the place was packed with travelers looking for a taste of ancient Earth culture. The boy darted past a malfunctioning beverage dispensing robot that kept announcing, "Please select your hydration option," while simultaneously spraying purple liquid in random directions. Several patrons had taken to using it as an impromptu fountain of sorts, daring each other to taste the mysterious concoction. Overhead screens flashed with the day's news. Rumored Imperial Dragon representative visits Garliv 7. Station officials neither confirm nor deny. Mirren snorted. Imperial dragons were practically mythical to someone like him. Immensely powerful beings who ruled vast sectors of the galaxy. What would one be doing in this grimy outpost? The closest he'd ever come to royalty was when a drunk Centaurian claimed to be a third cousin to some minor, noble house before passing out on the cafe floor. As he rounded the corner toward the diplomatic sector, a shortcut to the cafe, the station's alarm abruptly blared to life. Red lights pulsed along the corridors as a computerized voice calmly announced, "Security alert in Diplomatic Zone B. All non-essential personnel, please evacuate in an orderly fashion." People began moving away, some rushing, others merely annoyed at the interruption. Mirren hesitated. Lumina would have his hide if he didn't show up, alarm or not. But his curiosity got the better of him when he heard a sharp crack, like lightning striking metal, followed by shouting. Before common sense could intervene, he inched closer to the commotion, peeking around a pillar adorned with the symbols of various galactic factions. The diplomatic lobby, normally a picture of sterile efficiency, had descended into chaos. Security officers crouched behind overturned furniture while station officials frantically whispered into communication devices. In the center of it all stood a lone figure, tall and gaunt, wrapped in a shimmering cloak that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the pulsing emergency lights. Across from this mysterious figure was another individual, a masked being wielding what Mirren immediately recognized as a black market plasma rifle. These weapons were outlawed in most civilized systems due to their destructive capabilities and tendency to melt through standard protective gear. "Move aside," the masked attacker shouted, the voice modulator making their words sound like grinding metal. "This doesn't concern the station. I just want the emissary." The cloaked figure remained motionless, saying nothing. Something about their stillness sent a chill down Mirren's spine. Security personnel had their weapons drawn, but seemed hesitant to fire. Mirren understood why diplomatic incidents in neutral territory could trigger interstellar conflicts. The attacker, however, had no such concerns. "Last chance," the modulated voice growled, rifle raising to aim directly at the cloaked figure's midsection. Time seemed to slow. Mirren later couldn't explain what possessed him in that moment. Perhaps it was the same instinct that had kept him alive since his parents died in the Proxima mining collapse. Or maybe it was simple human empathy. The cloaked figure looked old and vulnerable to him, like the maintenance workers who sometimes slipped him extra ration cards when supervisors weren't looking. The plasma rifle whined as it charged, the sound cutting through the chaos like a blade. Without further thought, Mirren lunged from his hiding spot, propelling himself across the polished floor toward the cloaked figure. "Look out!" he shouted, a pointless warning given he was already in motion. The rifle discharged. A searing bolt of superheated plasma tore through the air. Mirren's body intercepted it. The impact felt like being simultaneously crushed and set on fire. His vision whited out as the plasma round struck his upper back, searing through tissue and bone. He crashed to the floor, skidding across the immaculate diplomatic sector tiles, now slick with his blood. As consciousness rapidly faded, Mirren heard a sound like thunder. No, like a roar. The cloaked figure's hood had fallen back, revealing something impossible, something with scales that gleamed like burnished gold and eyes that shifted between a dozen colors at once. The Imperial Dragon, someone gasped. The last thing Mirren saw before blackness claimed him was a massive, clawed hand reaching toward him, its surface reflecting light in patterns that no human skin could produce. Around him, pandemonium erupted anew, not just because of the attack, but because human blood had been spilled on neutral ground, and according to ancient protocols, that changed everything. A steady beeping penetrated the darkness. Mirren tried to swat at the source of the noise, but nothing happened. His arm refused to obey the simplest command. Panic fluttered in his chest as he forced his eyes open, immediately squinting against harsh white light. "He's awake," a voice announced. Mirren tried to turn his head toward the sound, but even that small movement proved impossible. Fear crystallized in his gut as he realized he couldn't feel his limbs at all. Nothing responded, not his arms, not his legs. Only his face seemed capable of movement. What's happening?" His voice emerged as a croak. "Why can't I move?" A face appeared above him. Human, female, with close-cropped silver hair and the focused expression of someone who'd seen too much tragedy to be fazed by anything. "My name is Dr. Ilera Vassin. You're in the diplomatic medical wing of Garliv 7. You've been unconscious for nearly 3 days." "I can't move," Mirren repeated, his voice cracking. "Why can't I move anything?" Dr. Vassin's expression softened slightly. "The plasma weapon used by the attacker caused extensive damage to your spinal cord. You're currently in a state of quadriplegia, paralysis affecting all 4 limbs." A mechanical arm suddenly whirred to life beside the bed, offering a cup with a straw. Mirren stared at it in confusion. "Neural interface," Dr. Vassin explained. "It's responding to my commands for now, but once we calibrate it properly, you'll be able to control basic functions with your thoughts. It's temporary assistance, but the best we could arrange on short notice." Mirren somehow managed to laugh, though it came out as a strangled sound. "So, I stopped a plasma bolt and got robot arms as a consolation prize? Great trade." Dr. Vassin didn't smile. "You didn't just stop a plasma bolt, Mirren. You saved the life of the Imperial Dragon's emissary." "The what now?" Mirren blinked rapidly, fragments of memory reassembling themselves. The cloaked figure, the gleaming scales. That was actually a dragon? From the Empire? I thought they were just, really big shots who called themselves that. Before Dr. Vassin could respond, the door to the medical room slid open. A tall, uniformed individual entered, human but with such perfect posture and precise movements that they almost seemed artificial. Behind them followed 2 station security officers and a third figure whose crisp white uniform bore the insignia of Garliv 7's diplomatic corps. "Ambassador THYX," Dr. Vassin acknowledged with a nod. "I was just explaining the situation to our patient." The diplomatic representative, Ambassador THYX, stepped forward. He had the carefully neutral expression of someone trained to reveal nothing. "Mirren, is it? I'm Station Ambassador Lauren THYX. I need to speak with you about what happened." Mirren tried to nod, but was reminded again of his immobility. "Not like I'm going anywhere," he said. "What you did was unprecedented," THYX began, clasping his hands behind his back. "You should understand that the entity you protected wasn't merely a representative of the Imperial Dragons. It was one of the Imperial Dragons themselves." Despite his condition, Mirren felt his mouth fall open. "An actual Imperial Dragon? Here." THYX continued as if he hadn't spoken. "The Imperial Dragons are the most powerful political force in this quadrant. Their empire spans dozens of systems, and their influence extends much further. They maintain peace or wage war at their discretion." "I didn't know," Mirren whispered. "I just saw someone about to be shot. That's precisely what makes this situation so complex." THYX paced a small circle before the bed. You see, when your blood spilled on neutral diplomatic ground while saving an Imperial Dragon, you triggered an ancient protocol embedded in galactic law. Blood spilled in defense of royalty has implications. A commotion outside drew Ambassador THYX's attention. Through the half-open door, Mirren glimpsed a crowd gathering in the corridor. Not just medical staff, but beings of various species, some with recording devices and others in formal attire. "What's with all the people?" Mirren asked. Dr. Vasson sighed. "News travels fast, especially when it involves Imperial Dragons and dramatic rescues. There are already reports calling you the Dragon's Shield. Some radical groups are claiming you staged this as a publicity stunt for pro-Dragon factions. That's ridiculous. I didn't even know." "We know," THYX interrupted. "But perception shapes reality in diplomacy. And speaking of perception," he nodded to one of the security officers, who activated a small hollow projector. The image that appeared showed Mirren's own body, crumpled on the floor of the diplomatic sector, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. The recording continued, showing medical staff rushing to his aid while security subdued the attacker. "Do you see the pattern your blood formed on the floor?" THYX asked. Mirren squinted at the hologram. His blood had spread in an oddly symmetrical pattern, almost like the Accord sigil. THYX confirmed. "Whether by chance or cosmic design, your blood pooled into a shape remarkably similar to the emblem of the Galactic Accord, the 1,000-year peace treaty between major powers." "So, that's good, right?" Mirren asked hesitantly. Ambassador THYX's expression turned grave. "It means that according to ancient protocol, you now have the ceremonial right to either reaffirm or dissolve the Accord. You become a living key to galactic stability." Mirren would have laughed if the situation weren't so absurd. "But I'm just a station kid. I mop floors at Lumina's Cafe and deliver packages for extra credits." "And now you're also a target," came a new voice, deep and resonant in a way no human voice could be. Everyone in the room immediately straightened as a towering figure ducked to enter through the doorway. Though humanoid in basic shape, the being before them was undeniably alien. Golden scales caught the light as the Imperial Dragon moved, each step measured and graceful despite their massive size. Eyes that seemed to contain swirling galaxies swept the room before settling on Mirren. "You may leave us," the dragon said to the others. It wasn't a request. THYX bowed deeply. "Of course, Your Imperial Majesty." He backed away, ushering the others out. Only Dr. Vasson hesitated. "The patient requires monitoring," she stated, impressively unfazed by the royal presence. The dragon's mouth, filled with teeth that resembled polished gemstones more than biological structures, curved slightly. "I assure you, Doctor, no harm will come to him under my watch." With visible reluctance, Vasson departed, leaving Mirren alone with the being whose life he'd saved. The Imperial Dragon studied him for an uncomfortably long moment. "You are smaller than I expected," they finally said. Mirren would have shrugged if he could. "Sorry to disappoint." To his surprise, the dragon made a sound like distant thunder, laughter he realized. "You misunderstand. I meant it as an observation, not criticism. Great courage often comes in unexpected packages." The dragon moved closer, their massive frame dwarfing the medical equipment. "You have my gratitude, young human." Few would risk themselves for a stranger, even fewer for one they mistakenly believed to be ordinary. "I thought you were a janitor," Mirren blurted out. "Or maybe some old diplomat." The cloak hid, "Well, everything." More rumbling laughter. "A janitor? How delightful." "I was in disguise, yes, though evidently not disguised well enough to avoid assassins." The dragon's expression grew serious. "But your intervention has created complications beyond your injury. A group called Darrow's Maw has claimed responsibility for the attack. They seek to destabilize my empire and trigger interstellar war. By shooting you, by creating martyrs and diplomatic incidents," the dragon corrected. "And now, they seek to use you, or rather, the ceremonial power your blood sacrifice has granted you to achieve their ends. Mirren tried to process this information. So because I bled on the floor trying to save you, I'm now, what? Some kind of diplomatic wild card. Precisely. The ancient protocols are clear. Blood spilled in defense of sovereignty on neutral ground grants the defender certain ceremonial rights. In normal circumstances, this would be a mere formality. But with tensions already high, the dragon reached out a clawed hand, hovering it above Mirren's forehead. I can help heal you, little human. The technology of the Empire is far advanced compared to what this station possesses. It may not restore you completely, but it would be a beginning. Why would you do that? The dragon's multifaceted eyes seemed to peer into Mirren's soul. Because you acted without knowledge of who I was, without expectation of reward, at great personal cost. Such purity of intent is rare, and because I suspect we will need you whole for what comes next. Outside the room, beyond the closed door, Mirren could hear the growing murmur of voices. It seemed the universe had suddenly taken a great interest in an orphan station boy who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or perhaps the right place at exactly the right time. The Imperial Dragon followed his gaze toward the door. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, we depart for Imperial space. We will be safer. The medical transport is already being prepared. I don't get a say in this. Mirren asked. The dragon tilted their massive head. Would you prefer to remain here, paralyzed and vulnerable to those who would use you as a pawn? Put that way, the answer is obvious. I guess we're going to Dragonland. Mirren sighed. The Imperial capital. The dragon corrected with what might have been amusement. And you may address me as Tessara. It is the closest approximation of my name your tongue can manage. Tessara, Mirren repeated. I'd shake your hand, but... He glanced down at his immobile body. The dragon, Tessara, made a gesture that might have been the draconic equivalent of a smile. We shall remedy that soon enough. The neural interface surgery had taken 16 hours. Mirren hadn't been conscious for it, thankfully, but the aftermath left him feeling like his skull had been used as a percussion instrument in a heavy metal band. Tiny filaments now connected his brain to a spinal bypass system. Bleeding-edge technology from the Empire that Dr. Vassin had observed with poorly disguised professional envy. Try again, instructed the Imperial surgeon, a tall, willowy being with iridescent scales and six-fingered hands. Focus on the image of movement, not the movement itself. Mirren concentrated on the virtual sphere displayed in the air before him. He wasn't trying to move his arm. That was still impossible, but rather to direct the assistive exoskeleton now attached to his right arm using only his thoughts. The robotic framework jolted, then jerked forward abruptly, sending a nearby tray of instruments clattering to the floor. Mirren winced. It's like trying to whisper, but screaming instead. Neural calibration requires patience, the surgeon said, her voice melodious despite the clinical tone. Your brain must learn to communicate with the interface at appropriate intensities. A soft chime indicated someone at the door. Mirren instinctively tried to turn his head. Still impossible. But the neural interface interpreted this as a command to activate the room's view screen. Suddenly the wall displayed a magnified image of his own left ear. Sweet cosmos, muttered the surgeon, adjusting the controls. Let's try that again. The door slid open to reveal a human woman in a crisp uniform adorned with insignias Mirren didn't recognize. She moved with military precision, her dark skin contrasting with short-cropped platinum hair. A scar bisected her left eyebrow, continuing down to her cheekbone. Commander Nalia Quell, she announced, posture perfect. Imperial Security Division. I've been assigned as protection detail for the boy. The patient, corrected the surgeon, is in the middle of neural calibration. Perhaps you could return. No time, Commander Quell interrupted. We've intercepted communications suggesting Darrow's Maw operatives have infiltrated the station. We moved to the transport vessel immediately. As if to emphasize her point, the station's alert system activated, though this time the announcement was couched in deliberately vague terms. Attention, all personnel. Security protocols have been elevated to level 3. Please comply with all official directives. That's the third time today they've raised the alert level, Mirren noted. Are things getting worse, or are they just being cautious? Commander Quell's expression remained neutral. Let's just say, I wouldn't recommend extending your stay. Can he be moved? She asked the surgeon. The interface is only partially calibrated, but the essential connections are stable. Moving him now is not ideal, but possible. Good enough. Quell approached Mirren's bed. I'm going to transfer you to a hover stretcher. The exoskeleton should provide basic support, but don't attempt to control it during transport. Mirren felt himself being lifted by mechanical arms and transferred to a floating platform. The sensation was disorienting. He could see himself being moved, but felt nothing below his neck. The neural interface sent occasional pulses of phantom sensation, like electricity skipping through non-existent limbs. What about my stuff? He asked, then immediately felt foolish. He owned virtually nothing beyond a few items of clothing and a small collection of trinkets gleaned from various corners of the station. Station security collected your personal effects, Quell replied, surprising him. Limited as they are. They're already aboard the transport. As they moved through the corridors of the medical wing, Mirren noticed the unusual level of activity. Staff hurried about with determined expressions, and armed security personnel stood at intervals, hands resting on weapons. Is all this for me? He asked. Commander Quell shook her head slightly. Not just you. The Imperial Dragon's presence has attracted attention from multiple factions. Some friendly, many not. They approached a security checkpoint where guards were scanning all passing individuals. One of them stepped forward with a handheld device. Identity verification, he stated, pointing the scanner at Mirren. He's under Imperial protection, Quell said sharply. Station protocols require. Override code Tesseragold 7, Quell interrupted. Direct authorization from the Imperial Dragon. The guard's eyes widened slightly. He stepped back, bowing his head. Of course, Commander. Proceed. As they continued, Mirren whispered, That was impressive. That was necessary, Quell corrected. The fewer people who scan your biometrics, the better. Darrow's Ma has contacts throughout neutral territories. They're likely monitoring all official channels. They had nearly reached the docking bay when the lights suddenly flickered. The hover stretcher wobbled momentarily before stabilizing. That's not good, Mirren observed. Quell's hand moved to her sidearm, a sleek, matte black weapon unlike standard station issue. No, it's not. The corridor ahead filled with acrid smoke as an explosion rocked the station. Warning klaxons blared as emergency containment protocols activated. Blast doors began descending at intervals along the passage. Run, Quell ordered, shoving the hover stretcher forward at maximum speed. They barely cleared the final blast door before it slammed shut behind them. The docking bay was chaos. Station personnel scrambled to contain damage while travelers panicked, trying to reach their vessels. Through the massive viewport, Mirren could see the curve of the nearby planet and the twinkling lights of ships waiting in orbit. So close, yet impossibly far. There, Quell pointed toward a sleek, silver-hulled vessel bearing the Imperial Dragon insignia. That's our transport. They had almost reached it when plasma fire erupted from behind a stack of cargo containers. Quell shoved Mirren's stretcher behind a support column and returned fire in one fluid motion. Darrow's Ma, she growled. Right on schedule. 3 attackers wearing nondescript combat gear advanced, firing continuously. Quell picked off one with a precise shot, but the others spread out, making targeting difficult. Mirren, helpless on a stretcher, suddenly felt his neural interface flaring to life. In his panic, he had inadvertently activated the exoskeleton. His right arm jerked upward, the robotic frame responding to his adrenaline-fueled thoughts. Stay down, Quell ordered, ducking beneath a barrage of plasma bolts. I'm trying, Mirren hissed, concentrating on deactivating the exoskeleton. Instead, his arm swung wildly, knocking into a control panel on the wall beside him. Red lights flashed as the station's fire suppression system activated. Foam began spraying from ceiling nozzles. quickly covering everything in a thick, sticky substance designed to smother flames and neutralize energy weapons. The unexpected deluge created momentary confusion. Quell seized the opportunity, firing 3 rapid shots that dropped the remaining attackers. "Did you do that on purpose?" she asked, wiping foam from her face. "Total accident," Mirren admitted. "But I'll take credit if it helps." A new figure emerged from the Imperial vessel, a dragon, smaller than Tessera, but no less impressive, scales gleaming blue-black in the emergency lighting. "Commander Quell," the dragon called. "We must depart immediately. Station authorities report multiple breaches." With a quick nod, Quell pushed Mirren's stretcher toward the vessel's ramp. As they boarded, Mirren caught a glimpse of more armed figures entering the docking bay, only to be repelled by Imperial guards. The transport's interior was surprisingly austere given its royal passengers, functional rather than luxurious, with medical equipment integrated into the bulkheads. Mirren's stretcher locked into a specialized berth as crew members secured for departure. "What about the other people?" Mirren asked, watching civilians still scrambling on the docking bay floor. "Station security will handle evacuation procedures," the blue-black dragon stated, voice distinctly feminine compared to Tessara's deeper tones. "Our priority is your safety." "My safety? What about them? They're being shot at because of me." The dragon regarded him with gemstone eyes. "They're being shot at because terrorists wish to disrupt galactic peace. You merely provide a convenient focal point." The vessel detached from the station, engines humming to life. Through a small viewport, Mirren watched Garliv 7 recede, the only home he'd known since his parents' death, now literally slipping away. "Where's Tessera?" he asked, suddenly realizing the Imperial Dragon was nowhere to be seen. "His Imperial Majesty travels separately," Commander Quell explained, securing her weapons. "Basic security protocol." "His—" Mirren blinked in confusion. "I thought, never mind." Gender, he was learning, was often a fluid concept among different species. The blue-black dragon made a sound like chimes tinkling. "You may address me as Lysith. I am Tessera's first scale, what humans might call a cousin or royal advisor. I shall answer your questions during our journey to the Imperial capital." "How long will that take?" "Approximately 72 hours at full thrust," Lysith replied, "during which time you will continue your neural interface training. By the time we arrive, you should have basic mobility functions." Mirren stared at the ceiling, reality finally catching up to him. 3 days ago, he'd been delivering packages and wiping tables. Now he was paralyzed, fleeing assassins, and headed to the heart of the Dragon Empire, all because he'd made a split-second decision to help someone in danger. "Tell me more about this blood protocol thing," he said, figuring he might as well understand what he'd gotten himself into. "Why does everyone care so much about where I bled?" Lysith settled into a couch-like structure clearly designed for draconic anatomy. The Galactic Accord was signed 1,000 years ago, ending the devastating Sundering Wars. It established neutral territories, trade routes, and diplomatic protocols between all major powers. "I know that part from school," Mirren said. "What I don't get is how I'm involved." The Accord contains an ancient clause, the blood right. It states that if innocent blood is spilled in defense of sovereignty on neutral ground, the defender gains ceremonial standing to address the Accord Council. And that's important. Commander Quell, who had been monitoring security feeds, turned to face him. "It's not just important, it's critical. The blood right isn't merely ceremonial. It comes with the power to propose amendments to the Accord that must be given full consideration. Darrow's Maul wishes to use you to introduce provisions that would weaken the Empire's position," Lysith continued. "Or worse, to invalidate sections of the treaty altogether, creating pretext for open conflict." Mirren's head spun with implications. "So you're saying my blood on the floor could literally start a war?" "Or prevent one," Lysith countered. "The blood right is neutral. It can be used for peace as easily as for conflict. It simply depends on who wields it. And everyone assumes I'll just do whatever I'm told?" Commander Quell's expression softened slightly. "That's exactly what Darrow's Maw is counting on. that you're just a malleable pawn. Prove them wrong. The vessel lurched suddenly as it engaged its hyperdrive. Stars outside the viewport stretched into lines of light, and Mirren felt a momentary sensation of pressure despite the inertial dampeners. "We've entered hyperspace," Lysith announced. "We are now beyond their reach, at least temporarily." As if on cue, Mirren's neural interface sparked, sending an unintended command to his exoskeleton. His right arm shot upward, then flailed wildly before Lysith calmly reached over and deactivated the system. "Perhaps we should resume your training," the dragon suggested, a hint of amusement in her melodious voice. "It seems you have much to learn before we reach the Imperial capital." Commander Quell nodded in agreement. "And not just about neural interfaces. If you're going to survive the Imperial court, you'll need a crash course in Draconic protocol. The formalities alone have driven diplomats to nervous breakdowns." "Great," Mirren sighed, paralyzed and finishing school at the same time. "Just what I always wanted." Despite his sarcasm, a small part of him, the part that had grown up dreaming of adventures beyond Garliv 7's recycled air, couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. For better or worse, his life had changed irrevocably. The only question was whether he would become a footnote in galactic history, or write a new chapter entirely. The Imperial capital wasn't a planet. That was Mirren's first shock as their vessel emerged from hyperspace 3 days later. He'd expected a world, perhaps one with towering spires and dramatic landscapes suitable for dragons. Instead, he faced a vast, artificial structure that defied conventional description. Imagine a Dyson ring, but instead of encircling a star, it orbited one at a respectful distance. The ring itself was composed of interconnected habitats, each the size of a small moon. Some resembled terrestrial environments with oceans and continents visible even from space. Others were clearly artificial, geometric patterns of light and material arranged in ways that suggested function over natural aesthetics. "That's not what I was expecting," Mirren managed, watching through the viewport. After 3 days of intensive neural interface training, he could now control a hoverchair with reasonable precision, allowing him mobility despite his paralysis. "The Imperial capital adapts to the needs of all citizen species," Lysith explained. "Dragons require specific atmospheric and gravitational conditions that would be unsuitable for many of our allies. This solution allows for specialized habitats while maintaining a unified government." Their vessel approached one of the larger segments, a section where massive structures of what appeared to be living metal rose like mountains, their surfaces shimmering with iridescent patterns. Mirren realized with a start that these weren't buildings in the conventional sense, but rather enormous roosts and gathering spaces designed for dragons to move comfortably in their natural forms. "Where will I stay?" he asked, suddenly aware of the scale disparity. "I'm guessing human-sized accommodations are limited." Commander Quell, who had spent much of the journey teaching Mirren the basics of Imperial etiquette, answered, "The diplomatic corridor has facilities for beings of all sizes. You'll be comfortable, but carefully monitored," Lysith added with characteristic draconic bluntness. "Until the Accord situation stabilizes, you represent both an asset and a vulnerability." Their transport docked with a smoothness that belied the complexity of connecting with a massive structure. As the airlock cycled, Mirren felt his stomach knot with anxiety. He'd made remarkable progress with the neural interface, but he remained catastrophically disabled by any normal standard. "Remember," Commander Quell said quietly, "maintain formal address at all times. Don't speak unless spoken to during the initial reception. And for the love of all stars, don't make jokes about hordes or fire breathing." "So basically, don't be myself," Mirren muttered. "Be yourself," Quell corrected. "Just the most polite, reserved version of yourself." The airlock opened to reveal a reception committee that nearly caused Mirren to lose control of his hoverchair. A dozen dragons in various sizes and colors stood arranged in a semicircle, each wearing what appeared to be ceremonial armor or robes embellished with glowing symbols. Behind them stood various other species, some humanoid, others decidedly not, all in formal attire that marked them as diplomatic staff. At the center waited Tessera, the Imperial Dragon, somehow even more imposing on home territory. Their golden scales seemed to pulse with inner light, and the regalia they wore, a complex arrangement of metallic plates that floated slightly above their body without actually touching, spoke of power beyond mere physical presence. Lysith moved forward first, performing an elaborate gesture that involved dipping her head while simultaneously flaring wing-like appendages Mirren hadn't noticed before. "Your Imperial Majesty," she intoned, "I present the human Mirren, blood defender of Sovereign Dragon." All eyes turned to Mirren, who suddenly felt impossibly small. His hover chair hummed forward automatically, a pre-programmed response, thank goodness, since his own control might have faltered. Hello, he said, then winced as Quell shot him a warning glance. I am honored by your reception, your Imperial Majesties. He fumbled the plural, unsure if all dragons present were royalty or merely courtiers. To his surprise, Tessera made a sound like distant thunder, the draconic laugh he'd heard before. The boy speaks from the heart, not from protocol lessons hastily administered during transit. How refreshing. One of the other dragons, smaller than Tessera, but with scales of deep crimson that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, moved forward with obvious disapproval. This is the human upon whom the fate of the Accord may rest? A child without training or status. A child who acted without hesitation to save a life. Morkant, Tessera countered, which is more than many with training and status might claim. The red dragon, Morkant, subsided, but Mirren could feel the skepticism radiating from several members of the welcoming committee. He didn't blame them. He had been skeptical too. Tessera addressed Mirren directly. You are now under the protection of the Imperial throne. You will be given quarters in the diplomatic wing, where your recovery can continue under the best medical supervision available. Additionally, you are hereby granted the honorary title of Scalebearer. Scalebearer? Mirren repeated, confused. A ripple of reaction passed through the assembled dragons. Surprise from some, what might have been amusement from others. It is a position of significant ceremonial importance, Lysith explained quietly. Traditionally reserved for those who have performed great service to the Imperial line. But without the actual responsibilities, Morkan added, making no attempt to lower his voice, as befits one who cannot even bear his own weight. Tessera's multifaceted eyes flashed with inner fire, silencing Morkant instantly. Mind your tongue, cousin. This human's sacrifice has earned our respect, not our derision. The tension hung in the air like static electricity before Tessera continued more calmly. Come, Mirren Scalebearer. There will be time for proper introductions after you have rested. The reception dispersed with mechanical efficiency, dragons and other beings flowing through massive corridors designed to accommodate various physiologies. Commander Quell remained by Mirren's side as they followed a smaller procession toward what he assumed were the diplomatic quarters. That went well, Mirren whispered. That went disastrously, Quell corrected under a breath. You addressed the Imperial Court informally. Morkant publicly insulted you, and Tessera had to defend your honor within minutes of arrival. So, Tuesday for you, huh? The ghost of a smile touched Quell's lips before she suppressed it. Just try not to start an interstellar incident before dinner. The diplomatic wing was a marvel of adaptive architecture. As they moved deeper into the structure, the scale of surroundings gradually shifted to more human-appropriate dimensions. The materials changed, too, from the living metal of dragon spaces to something warmer, though no less impressive. Mirren's assigned quarters were palatial by his standards, a multi-room suite with furnishings that adjusted automatically to his hover chair's height. Windows, or perhaps displays, it was hard to tell, showed breathtaking views of the capital's ring structure and the star it orbited. Home sweet home, he murmured, testing the neural interface by directing his chair in a slow circuit of the main room. At least until someone tries to kidnap me again. The diplomatic quarter has security measures that would make a military installation envious, Quell assured him. But don't test them. A chime announced another visitor. The door slid open to reveal a being unlike any Mirren had encountered. Vaguely insectoid, but with a translucent carapace through which complex patterns of light pulsed in hypnotic sequences. "This is Medical Overseer Sim-Xe," Quell introduced. "They'll be supervising your neural interface refinement and physical therapy." The being inclined their head, if that's what it was, in acknowledgement. "Your nervous system shows promising adaptation to the interface," they said, voice strangely melodious despite the alien physiology. "However, the current implementation is rudimentary. With your permission, we can begin more sophisticated integration tomorrow." "What does that mean exactly?" Mirren asked. "The full exoskeleton," Sim-Xe explained, gesturing with appendages that moved like flowing water. "Not merely directional control of a hover chair, but approximation of normal bipedal movement." Mirren's heart jumped. "You mean I could walk again?" "After a fashion. The technology cannot restore your nervous system, but it can bypass damaged pathways and translate neural impulses into mechanical action. With practice, the distinction becomes academic." Hope, something Mirren had carefully avoided since waking up paralyzed, surged through him. "When do we start?" "Rest tonight," Sim-Xe advised. "Tomorrow begins a new phase of your journey." After the medical overseer departed, Quell performed a thorough security sweep of the quarters before heading to the door herself. "I'll be stationed outside. If you need anything, just speak aloud. The room's systems will alert me." Alone for the first time since the shooting, Mirren allowed his composure to slip. Tears he'd been holding back slid down his cheeks as the magnitude of everything hit him at once. His body, broken beyond natural repair. His home left behind. His simple life, exchanged for political complexity he barely understood. "What am I doing here?" he whispered to the empty room. To his surprise, a gentle chime sounded, and a holographic interface materialized beside his hover chair. "Query detected," announced a pleasant voice. "Would you like information about the Imperial capital, your quarters, or available services?" Mirren gave a startled laugh, wiping tears away with his one semi-functional hand. "How about what happens when an orphan station kid gets dragged into galactic politics?" The system paused, then responded with impressive adaptability. "Historical precedent suggests 3 possible outcomes: elevation to diplomatic status, exploitation as a political pawn, or neutralization by opposing forces. Would you like information on any of these scenarios?" "No thanks," Mirren sighed. "I think I'll figure it out as I go." He directed his hover chair toward the window, gazing out at the impossible structure that was now, at least temporarily, his home. Somewhere in that vast artificial ring, decisions were being made about his future, and perhaps the future of galactic peace itself. One day at a time, he reminded himself, an expression his mother had often used before the mining accident. Just one day at a time. Days in the Imperial capital blended into weeks as Mirren's rehabilitation progressed. The full neural exoskeleton, a marvel of Dragon engineering, now encased his paralyzed body like a second skeleton, responding to his thoughts with increasing precision as he mastered the interface. Walking had been the first milestone, achieved after 10 days of grueling practice. The sensation was strange. He felt nothing from his limbs themselves, but the exoskeleton provided artificial feedback, creating phantom sensations that his brain gradually accepted as substitutes for lost feeling. Now, nearly a month into his stay, Mirren stood before a mirrored wall in the rehabilitation chamber, practicing more complex movements. The exoskeleton was visible as a lattice of silvery material over his clothes, highlighting joints and major muscle groups without fully encasing him. "Your adaptation rate exceeds projections," Sim-Xe observed, monitoring displays that showed Mirren's neural patterns. "Most subjects require 3 months to achieve your level of integration." "I'm motivated," Mirren replied, carefully executing a sequence that resembled a martial arts form. Commander Quell had suggested the exercises as a way to improve precision control. Nothing like assassins wanting to kidnap you to speed up physical therapy. Though he maintained a light tone, the threat remained very real. Intelligence reports, filtered and summarized for him by Quell, indicated Darrow's Maw operatives had infiltrated multiple sectors of the capital. 2 attempted breaches of the diplomatic quarter had already been thwarted. The door to the rehabilitation chamber slid open, admitting Lysith. The blue-black dragon had become something of a regular visitor, ostensibly monitoring his progress for the Imperial Court, but often engaging him in conversations that strayed far beyond his medical condition. "Your movements improve daily," she observed, her massive form somehow graceful despite the room's human-scale design. "Soon you might attempt the tea ceremony." Mirren groaned. "Please tell me that's not another diplomatic ritual I need to learn." "It is perhaps the most important one," Lysith replied with draconic seriousness. "Balance, precision, and respect for tradition, all demonstrated through the proper service of Kitharin tea. On the back of a moving dragon," added Quell, who had entered behind Lysith, while reciting traditional poetry. Mirren's jaw dropped. "You're joking." "The commander exaggerates," Lysith clarified, though Mirren detected what might have been amusement in her gemstone eyes. "The dragon remains stationary during the ceremony. The movement comes from thermal updrafts beneath their outstretched wings." "That's not reassuring." "It is a great honor," Lysith continued, "one rarely extended to non-dragons. It would silence those who question your position at court." Mirren had become increasingly aware of such questions. Despite Tessara's patronage, many in the Imperial Court viewed him with suspicion or outright hostility. Morkant led this faction, perpetually finding ways to remind everyone of Mirren's common origins and current limitations. "I'll add it to my list," Mirren sighed. "Right after master walking and avoid getting kidnapped." Quell stepped forward, her expression unusually grave. "Speaking of which, there's been a development. The Accord Council has officially acknowledged your blood right status. They're requesting your presence at an emergency session 3 days from now." Mirren's stomach nodded. "That's fast. Unprecedented," Lysith confirmed. "The Accord Council rarely convenes emergency sessions, even during active conflicts. Something has changed the political landscape. Darrow's Maw released a manifesto," Quell explained. "They're claiming the Imperial Dragons have violated key provisions of the Accord for centuries, systematically oppressing non-draconic species. They're demanding a complete revision of territorial boundaries and governance structures." "What does that have to do with me?" "They cited your blood right as justification for emergency review," Quell said. "They're claiming your sacrifice was an unconscious protest against draconic hegemony." Mirren almost laughed at the absurdity. "That's ridiculous. I didn't even know Tessara was a dragon when I jumped in front of that plasma bolt." "Truth is irrelevant in politics," Lysith stated flatly. "Perception dictates reality. And currently, the perception throughout non-imperial territories is of a humble human willing to sacrifice everything to challenge dragon authority." "Great," Mirren muttered. "I'm a symbol of revolution without even trying." "Which is why," Quell said, "you need to appear before the council to set the record straight. Your direct testimony could neutralize Darrow's Maw's narrative." Sim-XA, who had been silently monitoring Mirren's neural readings during this conversation, spoke up. "The exoskeleton is not ready for extended diplomatic functions. The neural load would be excessive. We'll make adjustments." Quell insisted. "This is too important to delay." Mirren felt caught between opposing forces yet again. His medical recovery versus galactic politics. The story of his life lately. "I'll do it," he decided. "If it helps prevent a war, I can handle standing up for a few hours." Lysith's multifaceted eyes studied him with an unreadable expression. "It may not be so simple," Mirren Scalebearer. "The Council operates by ancient protocols. Your appearance will involve formal presentation of your blood right claim, ritual questioning from faction representatives, and possibly challenges to your account of events." "Challenges? Like what?" "Like accusations you were a planted operative," Quell said bluntly, "or that you're now a puppet of Imperial interests, or that your injury was self-inflicted for political gain." Mirren's exoskeleton hand clenched involuntarily, the neural interface responding to his surge of indignation. "That's insane." Why would anyone paralyze themselves on purpose? Power, Lysith answered simply. The blood right confers significant influence. Many would consider quadriplegia a reasonable price. The casual way she said it, as if permanent disability were merely a strategic calculation, sent a chill through Mirren. For the first time, he truly grasped how differently the various beings of the galaxy might perceive his situation. Then I definitely need to speak, he resolved. I can't let them twist what happened. Quell nodded approvingly. We'll begin preparation immediately. The Council operates in unified common, so language won't be an issue, but the protocols are Byzantine. As they discussed the upcoming Council session, none of them noticed the small maintenance drone quietly servicing an air filtration panel in the corner of the rehabilitation chamber. Nor did they detect the subtle transmission it sent to a receiver far beyond the diplomatic corridor. In a shadowy corner of the capital's commercial district, a figure received the drone's intelligence. Their features were obscured by a hood, but the smile that formed was unmistakably satisfied. The boy will address the council, they murmured to an unseen companion. Prepare the contingency. The Accord Council chamber defied Mirren's expectations. He'd imagined something grandiose, perhaps a massive amphitheater with ornate decorations befitting its importance. Instead, he found himself in a perfectly circular room of modest size, its walls a uniform white that seemed to absorb sound. The only adornment was a band of inscribed symbols running around the perimeter, which Lysith had explained contained the complete text of the original Accord in microscopic form. In the center stood a circular platform, currently empty. Surrounding it in concentric rings were seats of varying designs to accommodate the diverse physiologies of council representatives. The arrangement was egalitarian. No position held obvious precedence over others. It's so simple, Mirren whispered to Commander Quell, who stood beside his hover chair. Though capable of walking short distances with the exoskeleton, he'd been advised to conserve energy by using the chair until his actual testimony. The Sundering Wars taught harsh lessons about ostentation, Quell replied quietly. The chamber was designed to emphasize substance over status. Representatives were filing in, filling their designated seats. Some Mirren recognized from briefings. The crystalline Vox Collective, the gelatinous Morphean Confluence, the insectoid Hive Consensus. Others were new to him, their appearances ranging from nearly human to utterly alien. Dragons were present too, though notably separated from the Imperial delegation. These, Quell had explained, represented independent dragon enclaves that maintained autonomy from the Empire while sharing biological kinship. Interesting, Mirren observed. I thought all dragons were part of the Empire. A common misconception, Lysith said from behind them. The blue-black dragon had insisted on accompanying them, though protocol required her to sit with the Imperial delegation rather than remain at Mirren's side. Many chose independence when the Empire was formalized. Some remained critics of Imperial policy. A subtle change in the chamber's lighting signaled the session's imminent start. Conversations quieted as a being Mirren couldn't quite focus on. Its form seemed to shift constantly between different states of matter. Approached the central platform. The Arbiter, Quell whispered, artificially evolved from the quantum computers that calculated the original Accord terms. Completely neutral by design. The Arbiter's voice emerged not as sound, but as concepts that formed directly in the minds of all present. The emergency session of the Accord Council is convened. We acknowledge the blood right invocation as valid per Ancient Protocol 7.3. A ripple of response passed through the assembled representatives. The human designate. Mirren is recognized as Blood Defender with speaking privilege. Let the formal presentation commence. Quell squeezed Mirren's shoulder gently, a signal they had practiced. Taking a deep breath, he directed his hover chair forward toward the central platform, the exoskeleton beneath his clothes humming softly as it adjusted to his nervous tension. As he reached the platform, it illuminated from within, scanning him with invisible sensors. Satisfied with his identity confirmation, the platform elevated slightly, placing him at the focal point of all attention. Representatives of the Accord Council, Mirren began, his voice steadier than he felt. I appear before you under unusual circumstances. My blood right status was not sought nor initially understood. I acted on instinct to protect what I believed was an innocent life, unaware of Imperial Dragon Tessar's identity or the diplomatic consequences. He paused, letting his gaze move across the assembled dignitaries. Some leaned forward with interest, others remained inscrutable. I have been made aware that some factions interpret my actions as protest against imperial governance. This interpretation is false. I had no political motivation whatsoever. I was, and remain, a simple station orphan who believed someone needed help. A representative from the Morphean confluence, a shimmering column of translucent gel, extruded a communication tendril. The circumstances of your intervention are documented. What remains unclear is your current position. You reside in Imperial territory, benefit from Imperial medical technology, and hold an Imperial ceremonial title. Can you claim neutrality? It was a fair question, one Mirren had anticipated. I don't claim neutrality. I acknowledge the Empire's generosity in treating my injuries. But my testimony is shaped by truth, not obligation. I acted independently before, and I speak independently now. Whispers, or their equivalent across different communication methods, rippled through the chamber. Not a bad start, Mirren thought. Then a different representative rose, a being with rough, stone-like skin etched with glowing patterns. The lithochronic collective questions the fundamental premise of this hearing. The human's blood right is technically valid but contextually suspect. We believe. The stone being's statement cut off abruptly as the chamber's lighting flickered. A moment later, emergency containment fields shimmered into existence around the central platform, isolating Mirren from the rest of the chamber. What's happening? Mirren asked, heart racing. The exoskeleton responded to his alarm, locking joints to stabilize him as the hoverchair's safety protocols activated. The Arbiter's thought voice resonated with unusual urgency. Asterisk security breach detected. Council chamber lockdown initiated. All representatives remain in position. Asterisk. Commander Quell was already in motion, weapon drawn as she tried to approach the containment field surrounding Mirren. 3 steps forward, she collided with an invisible barrier, a second containment field separating the audience area from the central floor. Mirren, she shouted. System override, Quell Epsilon 9. Nothing happened. The containment field remained in place. Chaos erupted as representatives realized the severity of the situation. Some rose from their seats, while others remained frozen in shock. The Imperial Dragon delegation, including Lysith, confronted the security officers positioned around the chamber's perimeter. Override failure indicates internal compromise, Quell called to Lysith. Someone with council access codes initiated this lockdown. Before anyone could respond, a section of the chamber floor beneath Mirren's platform silently slid open. His hoverchair automatically compensated for the sudden change, preventing him from falling into the revealed passage, but a powerful gravitational field began pulling him downward. Help! Mirren shouted, the exoskeleton straining against the inexorable force. His hoverchair's engines whined in protest as they fought the gravitational pull. The last thing he saw before being dragged into the passage was Commander Quell firing her weapon at the control panel governing the containment fields, and Lysith's massive form launching toward the security barrier, scales blazing with internal energy. Then darkness swallowed him as the floor panel sealed shut above. Mirren awoke to the sensation of movement. His hoverchair was gone, but the exoskeleton remained, keeping his paralyzed body upright in what appeared to be a transport vessel of some kind. His neural interface felt sluggish, likely affected by whatever had knocked him unconscious. The Ascendant awakens, observed a voice from behind him. Unable to turn his head naturally, Mirren focused on activating the exoskeleton's rotation function. Slowly, mechanical precision replacing natural fluidity, his body turned to face the speaker. The figure was humanoid, but clearly not human, tall and gaunt with skin that had the iridescent quality of an oil slick. Most distinctive were the eyes, 4 of them, arranged in a diamond pattern, all focused intently on Mirren. "Where am I?" Mirren demanded, his voice hoarse. "What happened at the council?" "You were extracted," the being replied matter-of-factly. "The council is in disarray, the Imperial delegation is furious, and various factions are scrambling to assess the implications. In short, exactly as planned." "Darrow's maw," Mirren realized aloud. "You're the terrorists who tried to kill Tessera." The being seemed amused. "Terrorist is a political designation, not an objective classification. We prefer evolutionary catalysts, and we never intended to kill Tessera, merely to create the circumstances that would lead to this moment." Cold realization washed over Mirren. "You planned this from the beginning. The assassination attempt, my intervention." "Not specifically you," the being clarified. "Any innocent bystander would have activated the blood right. You simply happened to be the most convenient candidate." "Convenient?" Anger surged through Mirren, causing the exoskeleton to stiffen. "You call paralyzing me convenient? From our perspective, extraordinarily so. Your quadriplegia added a layer of sympathy to the narrative that we couldn't have manufactured. The orphaned, disabled human who challenged Dragon authority? Political symbolism rarely aligns so perfectly." The casual cruelty of this assessment left Mirren momentarily speechless. These beings had orchestrated his paralysis as a political ploy, ruining his life for symbolic value. The transport shuddered slightly as it changed course. Through a small viewport, Mirren glimpsed unfamiliar stars. They had already left the Imperial capital far behind. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked. "Your cooperation would be ideal," the being replied. "But it's not strictly necessary. The blood right is bound to you, but its exercise can be facilitated. We have specialists who can ensure your formal request to dissolve key sections of the Accord appears completely voluntary. Mind control, or perhaps drugs. Either way, they plan to use him as a puppet to legitimize their agenda." "That won't work," Mirren bluffed. "The blood right requires sincere intent. The Arbiter would detect coercion." The being's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, perhaps their version of laughter. "An ambitious deception, but we both know the Arbiter detects only procedural compliance, not subjective sincerity. The ancient protocols are formalistic by design." A door at the far end of the compartment slid open, admitting another figure. This one mechanical, a sophisticated android with exposed circuitry pulsing beneath transparent panels. "Preparations are complete," the android announced, voice perfectly modulated. "We can begin the procedure once we reach sanctuary space." "Excellent," the 4-eyed being responded. "Our window of opportunity is narrow. The Empire will have deployed their entire fleet by now." Mirren's mind raced. The exoskeleton was his only potential advantage, but even at peak function, he doubted he could overpower 2 adversaries in an unfamiliar vessel. He needed information first. "What happens after I make this request?" he asked, trying to sound resigned rather than calculating. "Won't dissolving the Accord lead to another sundering war?" "Limited conflict is inevitable," the being acknowledged. "But the current system perpetuates Dragon hegemony under the guise of peace. Sometimes regression must precede true progress. And where do I fit into this true progress? Your role concludes once the request is formalized. After that, you'll be relocated to a rehabilitation facility on a neutral world. Your historic contribution will be acknowledged once the new order stabilizes." Translation: once they'd used him, they'd discard him somewhere remote. If he survived at all, the android approached, extending an appendage that contained medical equipment. Standard procedure requires sedation during transit to prevent neural interface tampering. As the android reached toward him, Mirren made his decision. He had one chance, relying on weeks of neural interface training and the most basic of human instincts: survival. Focusing intensely, Mirren sent a surge of neural commands to the exoskeleton. Not the calibrated, precise signals he'd practiced, but a desperate flood of raw impulses. Fight, flee, resist. The exoskeleton responded with a violent spasm that sent his arm swinging upward with far more force than he'd ever generated in training. The mechanical limb collided with the android's extended appendage, shattering delicate medical equipment and sending electrical feedback cascading through both systems. Alarms blared as the connection between android and exoskeleton created an unintended circuit. Electricity arced between them, the surge. Overwhelming safety protocols in both systems. The android collapsed, internal systems shorting out. The four-eyed being lunged forward, but Mirren was already sending new commands to the exoskeleton. Ignoring precision in favor of raw power, he directed all available energy to his legs, propelling himself forward with uncontrolled force. The collision sent both of them crashing into the transport's control console. Warning lights flashed as navigation systems went offline. The vessel lurched violently, artificial gravity fluctuating. "Stop!" the being shouted. "You'll kill us both." Mirren couldn't stop if he wanted to. The neural interface was overloading, commands amplifying as feedback loops formed in the damaged system. The exoskeleton moved with jerky, unpredictable motions, limbs lashing out randomly. A particularly violent spasm sent his fist through a control panel. Sparks erupted as critical systems failed. The transport began spinning, emergency protocols activating too late to compensate. Through the viewport, Mirren glimpsed a massive shape materializing from hyperspace, a vessel of impossible proportions, gleaming gold against the void. The Imperial flagship. His last thought before impact threw him against the bulkhead was oddly calm. At least they found me. Then darkness again. Of all the reckless, ill-considered, statistically improbable outcomes, the voice penetrated Mirren's haze of unconsciousness, familiar in its melodious alien cadence. SimXA, the medical overseer, apparently lecturing someone nearby. The neural interface was never designed to handle such inputs. The fact that his brain didn't cook inside his skull is nothing short of miraculous. But he will recover. Another voice, Lysith's distinctive tones. Define recover. The interface is damaged beyond repair. The exoskeleton requires complete replacement, and his already compromised nervous system has suffered additional trauma from electrical feedback. Mirren tried to open his eyes, but found even that simple action exhausting. He managed a small groan instead. "He's conscious," Lysith observed. "Mirren, can you hear me?" Unfortunately, Mirren croaked, his throat painfully dry. "Am I back in the capital?" "The Imperial flagship," Lysith corrected. "We intercepted the Darrow's mock transport after its navigation system malfunctioned. Rather spectacularly, I might add." Memories flooded back. The council chamber, the abduction, his desperate gamble with the exoskeleton. The four-eyed alien, captured, along with several other Darrow's Maw operatives. Their network had deeper penetration of Accord security than anyone suspected. The council is re-examining its protocols. Mirren finally managed to open his eyes. He lay in what appeared to be a medical bay, surrounded by equipment scale for dragons rather than humans. SimXA hovered nearby, multiple appendages manipulating diagnostic tools, while Lysith's massive form somehow managed to look both regal and concerned. "How bad is it?" Mirren asked, dreading the answer. SimXA's carapace flashed patterns that Mirren had learned indicated clinical detachment. The neural interface requires complete replacement. Your recovery will essentially restart from the beginning. The news hit Mirren like a physical blow. Weeks of painful progress erased in an instant. Back to immobility, back to dependence. However, the medical overseer continued, the incident provided valuable data on interface capabilities under extreme conditions. The replacement system will incorporate significant improvements. "Great," Mirren muttered. "My nervous breakdown was educational." Lysith made a sound that might have been the draconic equivalent of a chuckle. "Your nervous breakdown also exposed a conspiracy that threatened galactic stability. Imperial intelligence had suspected Darrow's Maw infiltration, but lacked proof until your abduction forced their hand. Commander Quell entered the medical bay, her uniform slightly disheveled, but her posture perfect, as always. "The boy has a talent for chaos," she observed. "Even unconscious, he manages to advance our objectives." "What objectives?" Mirren asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "Was I bait this whole time?" Quell's expression softened slightly, a rare occurrence. "No, your safety was genuinely paramount. But when opportunity presents itself, good strategists adapt." Lysith nodded in agreement. "The Darrow's Maw operatives we captured have provided invaluable intelligence. Their organization is more extensive than we realized, with cells throughout neutral territories and even within Imperial space." "And the Accord Council?" Mirren asked. "What happens with my blood right now?" "That," said a new voice, deeper and more resonant than any other, "remains entirely your decision." Tessara entered the medical bay, golden scales luminous even in the clinical lighting. The Imperial Dragon's presence immediately dominated the space, not through intentional intimidation, but sheer natural authority. "Your Majesty," Quell said, bowing deeply. Tessara acknowledged her with a slight nod before focusing entirely on Mirren. "You have endured much on behalf of peace, young human. More than anyone should ask of you." "Not like I had much choice," Mirren replied, too exhausted for diplomacy. "There is always choice," Tessara countered, "even in the most constrained circumstances. You chose to intercept plasma fire meant for me. You chose to cooperate with rehabilitation rather than surrender to despair. You chose to risk yourself again by confronting your abductors." The dragon's multifaceted eyes studied him with disconcerting intensity. "And now you must choose once more. The blood right remains valid despite Darrow's Maw's interference. The Accord Council awaits your decision." Mirren felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, heavier than the paralysis that defined his physical existence. "What happens if I don't use it? If I just let it go?" "The status quo persists," Lysith explained. "The current accord continues to govern interstellar relations, with all its strengths and flaws. And if I do use it, what can I actually change?" Mirren asked. "The ancient protocols allow a blood defender to propose modifications to any provision of the accord," Tessara said. "Such proposals receive expedited consideration and require only majority approval rather than consensus." Mirren thought carefully. "So I could propose anything? New territories? Different rights for species?" "Within reason," Tessara cautioned. "Proposals must relate to the Accord's fundamental purpose, maintaining peace among diverse civilizations." An idea began forming in Mirren's mind. Not the radical dissolution Darrow's Maw had planned, nor simple preservation of a system that clearly had flaws. "I need time to think," he said finally. "And apparently a new exoskeleton." Tessara inclined their massive head. "Both shall be provided. The flagship returns to the capital tomorrow. The Council has agreed to reconvene when you are ready, a rare concession that indicates the gravity with which they view recent events." After the Imperial Dragon departed, Mirren spent hours in contemplation, interrupted only by Tsimexe's medical interventions and occasional updates from Commander Quell about the ongoing investigation into Darrow's Maw. By the time the flagship docked at the Imperial capital, Mirren had made his decision. 3 weeks later, Mirren once again entered the Accord Council chamber. This time, however, circumstances were markedly different. For one, he walked in under his own power, or rather, through the power of a completely redesigned exoskeleton. The new system was sleeker, more responsive, and partially integrated beneath his skin, creating a closer approximation of natural movement. He still felt nothing below his neck, but the phantom sensations generated by the interface had become sophisticated enough to provide workable substitutes. For another, he entered not as a novelty or curiosity, but as a recognized diplomatic entity. The Blood Defender status, once an arcane technicality, had evolved into something approaching an official position. The chamber was filled beyond capacity, with additional viewing arrangements established for delegations that couldn't fit in the normal seating. The attempted abduction and subsequent revelations about Darrow's maw had transformed a procedural emergency session into a historic diplomatic event. The Arbiter's thought voice resonated through the minds of all present. The reconvened emergency session acknowledges Blood Defender Mirren. Enhanced security protocols are active. The Defender may approach. Mirren walked to the central platform with measured steps, each movement a testament to weeks of intensive rehabilitation. Commander Quell accompanied him as diplomatic escort, while Lysith sat with the Imperial delegation. Tessara, due to their direct involvement in the original incident, had recused themselves from proceedings but watched from a private viewing area. As Mirren reached the platform, he felt a moment of déjà vu, the same illumination from within, the same subtle elevation. But this time, he stood on his own feet, face to face with the collective power of galactic civilization. Representatives of the Accord Council, he began, voice clear and steady. I appear before you to exercise the blood right granted under Ancient Protocol 7.3. Formal acknowledgement rippled through the chamber, some verbal, others expressed through species-specific gestures or emissions. Recent events have demonstrated both the strength and vulnerability of our current system, Mirren continued. The Accord has maintained general peace for a millennium, an achievement worthy of preservation. Yet it has also allowed inequities and resentments to fester, creating the conditions for organizations like Darrow's Maw to find support. He paused, scanning the chamber. The representative's attention was absolute. I do not propose dissolution of the Accord, as some had hoped, nor do I suggest preserving it unchanged, as others might prefer. Instead, I propose a middle path, the establishment of a permanent revision commission with representatives from all signatory powers and, critically, from non-aligned worlds and stateless populations. Whispers erupted across the chamber. This was unexpected, not a specific change to territory or rights, but to the process of governance itself. The Commission would operate on a rotating basis, evaluating provisions of the Accord against evolving realities. It would have the authority to propose adjustments for Council consideration on a regular schedule, rather than waiting for crisis or conflict to force reevaluation. The representative from a Morphean confluence extended a communication tendril. Your proposal has procedural merit, but what prevents such a commission from becoming another layer of bureaucracy, paralyzed by the same political considerations that limit Council effectiveness? Mirren had anticipated this concern. 2 safeguards. First, term limits for all Commission representatives, preventing entrenchment of interests. Second, mandatory inclusion of voices from populations directly affected by Accord provisions, not just governing authorities, but those living under their decisions. The representative from the Lithochronic Collective rose again, the same stone-like being who had questioned Mirren's legitimacy before the abduction. The Blood Defender proposes fundamental restructuring of governance mechanisms. This exceeds traditional blood right scope, which typically addresses specific grievances. With respect, Mirren countered, the ancient protocols define blood right authority as proportional to the sacrifice offered. My sacrifice was not merely physical, but ongoing. He gestured to his exoskeleton-supported body. I live with the consequences of my choice every moment. The scope of my proposal reflects the permanence of my condition. It was a powerful argument, linking his personal situation directly to the seriousness of his proposal. Even those skeptical of his motives could not deny the reality of his sacrifice. A representative from one of the independent Dragon enclaves, scales of burnished copper rather than imperial gold, raised a taloned hand. The Empire's influence over this human is concerning. How can we trust this isn't imperial manipulation through a sympathetic proxy? Commander Quell tensed beside Mirren, but he placed a mechanical hand on her arm, silently requesting restraint. A fair question, Mirren acknowledged, which is why my second proposal directly addresses imperial authority. This caused visible surprise among the imperial delegation, including Lysith. This portion of his presentation had been kept confidential even from his closest allies. I propose the Empire voluntarily relinquish exclusive control over 3 strategic hyperspace junctions currently under their jurisdiction, placing them under Accord-neutral administration. The chamber erupted in astonishment. The hyperspace junctions in question were key strategic assets, allowing rapid deployment of Imperial forces across vast distances. Voluntarily surrendering them would significantly reduce the Empire's military advantage, a concession no one had expected. The copper-scaled dragon seemed momentarily speechless. The Imperial delegation, meanwhile, conferred in obvious agitation. The human speaks without authority on Imperial matters, declared an Imperial representative, rising to full impressive height. These junctions are sovereign Imperial territory, not subject to blood right claims. Mirren had expected this reaction. I make no claim on Imperial territory. I merely propose a voluntary concession as a demonstration of genuine commitment to balance power. If the Empire rejects this proposal, that is their sovereign right. It was a masterful move. By framing it as a voluntary suggestion rather than a demand, Mirren had placed the Empire in a difficult position. Rejection would seem self-interested and undermine their claims of benevolent governance. Acceptance would require real sacrifice. From the private viewing area, Tessara watched with inscrutable, draconic attention. The Arbiter's thought voice cut through the growing debate. The Blood Defender's proposals are properly structured under Protocol 7.3. The Council will now deliberate on implementation feasibility. Standard voting procedures apply. As formal deliberations began, Mirren was escorted to a waiting area adjacent to the main chamber. Commander Quell accompanied him, her expression unreadable. You didn't share the hyperspace junction proposal during preparation, she noted once they were alone. Because your Imperial security, Mirren replied simply. It would have put you in an impossible position, and now the Empire is in an impossible position. She didn't sound angry, merely contemplative. Clever strategy. It's not strategy. It's balance. Mirren settled carefully into a seated position, the exoskeleton adjusting to support his spine. The Empire has disproportionate power. Darrow's Maw's methods were unconscionable, but their core grievance isn't entirely without merit. The door slid open as Lysith entered, her blue-black scales shimmering with what might have been agitation. You surprised us, Scalebearer. That was kind of the point, Mirren admitted. Tessara wishes to speak with you. Privately. Mirren felt a flutter of apprehension, but nodded. I expected as much. Lysith led him through a series of secure corridors to a small chamber clearly designed for confidential conversations. Tessara awaited within, golden scales subdued in the minimal lighting, regalia absent. Without the floating metallic plates and formal attire, the Imperial Dragon seemed somehow more genuine, if no less imposing. You propose I surrender critical strategic assets, Tessara stated without preamble. Assets that have guaranteed Imperial security for centuries. Mirren met the dragon's multifaceted gaze steadily. I propose you demonstrate that Imperial security doesn't depend on unilateral advantage. Some would call this betrayal of Imperial hospitality. Is it betrayal to suggest what you already know to be necessary? Mirren countered. The Empire is powerful enough to lead by example rather than force. Tessara's expression remained unreadable for a long moment. Then, to Mirren's surprise, the massive dragon lowered himself to a more equal eye level, a gesture of respect rarely offered to non-dragons. You continue to surprise me, young human. First with courage, then with resilience, now with wisdom. Not wisdom, Mirren corrected. Just clarity. When you have nothing left to lose but your principles, decisions become simpler. Tessara made the rumbling sound Mirren had come to recognize as draconic laughter. Nothing to lose? You underestimate your position. The Blood Defender status has elevated you from station orphan to galactic diplomat in a matter of months. A diplomat who can't feel his own body, Mirren reminded him. I trade all of this, the title, the influence, everything, to walk on my own legs again. Perhaps someday, Tessara said, more gently than Mirren had ever heard from the Imperial being. Medical science advances. But for now, your limitations have granted you perspective few possess. The Imperial Dragon rose to full height again. I will support your proposal regarding the hyperspace junctions. Mirren blinked in surprise. You will, with modifications. 2 junctions instead of 3, with Imperial representation on the Neutral Administration Council. Concession, but with safeguards. It was more than Mirren had expected. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The political repercussions within the Empire will be significant. Morkan's faction will use this to challenge my judgment. I'm sorry for any trouble I've caused you, Mirren said sincerely. Tessara dismissed this with a gesture. Trouble is the natural state of governance. Better constructive trouble than destructive stagnation. When they returned to the council chamber, deliberations had progressed significantly. With Tessara's qualified support for the hyperspace junction proposal, the tenor of discussion shifted. What had seemed radical began to appear visionary, a genuine path toward addressing systemic imbalances without dismantling the entire framework. After hours of detailed debate and procedural maneuvers, the arbiter called for final votes. The results appeared as glowing symbols projected above the central platform. Revision Commission Proposal. Approved, 78% affirmative. Hyperspace Junction Proposal. Approved with amendments, 63% affirmative. Mirren felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief, satisfaction, and a curious sense of completion. The blood rite had been exercised. Its ceremonial power, now spent, would return to dormancy until another rare confluence of circumstances activated it. As the session concluded, representatives approached to offer congratulations or thoughtful critiques. Even those who had opposed his proposals acknowledged the significance of the moment. The copper-scaled dragon from the independent enclave made a particular point of expressing qualified approval, not entirely misguided, for human influenced by Imperials. When the formalities finally concluded, Mirren found himself exhausted beyond measure. The exoskeleton compensated for his physical fatigue, but the mental and emotional toll of the day left him drained. Ready to return to quarters? Commander Quell asked, noticing his condition. More than ready, Mirren confirmed. As they departed the council chamber, he glanced back one last time at the circular room where, improbably, he had helped reshape galactic governance. Not bad for a station kid who once mopped floors for extra credits. 6 months later, Mirren stood on a balcony overlooking one of the Imperial capital's vast artificial landscapes. The vista before him featured towering spires of living crystal interspersed with garden structures designed for dragons to perch upon. In the distance, the massive ring structure curved visibly upward, a perpetual reminder of the artificial nature of this seemingly organic environment. His new exoskeleton, the 3rd iteration, was now so seamlessly integrated with his nervous system that casual observers often didn't realize he was paralyzed. The movements weren't perfect. They retained a certain mechanical precision that human fluidity lacked. But they were functional enough that he could navigate daily life with growing independence. Admiring the view? Asked Lysith, joining him on the balcony. The blue-black dragon had become something of a mentor during his extended stay in the capital. Wondering what comes next, Mirren admitted. The Revision Commission is established. The hyperspace junctions are under neutral administration. My ceremonial role is essentially complete. And you're restless, Lysith observed. A bit, Mirren acknowledged. Rehabilitation keeps me busy, but it's not exactly a life purpose. Lysith's multifaceted eyes studied him with characteristic intensity. The Imperial Diplomatic Corps has submitted a formal request for your services as a cultural liaison. Given your unique perspective on both human and draconic societies, they believe you could facilitate understanding between the Empire and non-aligned human worlds. Mirren considered this. A real position, not just an honorary title, with appropriate compensation and accommodations for your condition, Lysith confirmed. Though I suspect the real appeal would be the travel opportunities. She wasn't wrong. Despite the wonders of the capital, Mirren often felt the constraints of his situation, a human in a predominantly draconic environment, dependent on specialized medical support that limited his mobility. I need regular access to maintenance for the exoskeleton, he pointed out. Already arranged. The diplomatic vessels would carry appropriate medical personnel and equipment. Mirren smiled slightly. You seem to have thought of everything. Not I. Lysith corrected. Tessara. The Emperor believes your talents are wasted in rehabilitation chambers and ceremonial functions. Before Mirren could respond, Commander Quell appeared at the balcony entrance. Her expression, normally controlled, showed unusual tension. We have a situation, she announced without preamble. Darrow's Maw remnants have seized a research outpost in the Vega sector. They're threatening to release experimental bioweapons unless their captured leaders are released. Lysith's scales darkened with concern. The Council must be notified immediately. They have been, Quell confirmed. An emergency session is assembling, and they've specifically requested Mirren's presence. Me? What? Mirren asked, surprised. The blood right was already exercised. Not as blood defender, Quell explained. As consultant. They believe your insight into Darrow's Maw psychology, based on your abduction experience, could prove valuable. Mirren felt a strange mix of trepidation and purpose. Once again, circumstance was pulling him into events far larger than himself. But this time, he wasn't an accidental participant, but a requested advisor. When do we leave? He asked. Immediately, Quell replied. Transport is waiting. As they hurried from the balcony, Mirren reflected on the bizarre journey that had brought him to this point. From orphan station worker to paralyzed hero to diplomatic figure. Each transition unexpected, each role more improbable than the last. His exoskeleton hummed softly as it matched his quickening pace, the technology that supported his broken body becoming almost an extension of his will. It wasn't the life he would have chosen, but it was a life with meaning, and perhaps that was enough. In the docking bay, an Imperial diplomatic vessel awaited, its gleaming hull emblazoned with both Imperial insignia and the neutral markings of a court authority, a visual representation of the new cooperation Mirren had helped initiate. Commander Quell preceded him up the boarding ramp, already briefing the crew on security protocols. Lysith followed, her massive form somehow graceful despite the confined space. At the top of the ramp, Mirren paused for a moment, looking back at the capital that had been his home these past months. Then, with the mechanical precision that defined his new existence, he turned and stepped aboard, moving forward into whatever challenges awaited. Ready for departure, he confirmed, settling into a specially designed seat that accommodated his exoskeleton. As the vessel's engines ignited, Mirren allowed himself a small smile. The universe had thrown him into the path of an Imperial Dragon's assassin, broken his body, and thrust him into galactic politics. Yet somehow, through all of it, he had remained essentially himself, adaptable, resilient, and stubbornly optimistic. The diplomatic vessel rose smoothly from the docking bay, accelerating toward the stars. Somewhere in that vast expanse, a crisis demanded attention, and Mirren, improbably, impossibly, had a role to play in addressing it. He was no longer just the boy who took a bullet for a dragon. He had become something more, a living bridge between worlds, his broken body housing an unbroken spirit. Whatever came next, he would face it standing, even if it took an exoskeleton to keep him upright.